Hi, it's Ron MacLean, Hockey Night in Canada, Rogers Hometown Hockey, all set to go digging deep.
I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Welcome to Digging Deep, presented by Zen Books and Abacus Data. This is the latest in our series of one-on-one conversations with thoughtful, interesting people from many different fields. We talk to astronauts, Olympic champions, entrepreneurs, musicians, television hosts, and more. We explore their stories, their challenges, their defining moments, and we learn from them the powerful lessons that all of us can apply to our own lives. And here's how we do it. We start off with some rapid-fire questions that reveal little pieces of information about the guest, and then we start digging deep into those stories and life lessons. Our guest today is Ron MacLean. Most Canadians know Ron as the iconic host of Hockey Night in Canada for more than 30 years. He is a fixture in Canadian television. But in addition to being in many ways the face of Canada's national obsession, Ron is also one of the most intellectually curious people that I have ever met. He is incredibly well-read on a wide range of topics. During the coronavirus pandemic, while hockey was on hold, Ron put that knowledge to use in a series of powerful online conversations about race and other topics. I've been really fortunate to have had a number of conversations with Ron that have gone well beyond hockey and sports. And that's why I knew that he would make an outstanding guest on Digging Deep, and I think you will find that is very much the case. In our wide-ranging discussion, Ron shares with us several powerful and emotional stories, including what happened several years ago when his wife almost died of a blood clot, and what happened when his longtime partner Don Cherry left Hockey Night in Canada in 2019. Ron talks about restraining, about ambition, about forgiveness, about the difference between acting with a red heart and a black heart. He talks about why expectations will kill you. And he shares so much wisdom that he has gained from the experience of interviewing thousands of people. Now, one last thing before we get started. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and post a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and share this podcast with your network. And if you're looking for more information about this episode of the show, including links to anything we reference in our discussion, if you want to read my daily blog where I post every single day of the year, or subscribe to my newsletter, The Weekly Dig, which has 5 very quick items I've learned about each week, please go to our website, letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. You can also find a link there to my TEDx talk. All right, let's start digging deep with Ron MacLean. Ron, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to Digging Deep. I really appreciate it. And you know how much respect I have for you as a broadcaster and a person. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's totally mutual, Mark. Yeah, pleasure.
So let's get into some of our rapid fire questions, and we'll go down memory lane a little bit to start. What would you say is your fondest childhood memory?
For me, bar none, Christmas time. I had a tradition of listening to Bing Crosby's Christmas Around the World. It was an album that came out in the late 50s, and it had people corresponding around the world and introducing customs, Christmas customs in places like The Hague in the Netherlands, and the Vatican in Rome, and Notre Dame in Paris, and just the theater of the mind, the idea of all of us all around the planet doing the same thing. Of course, that was a Christian, perspective. I didn't realize at the time, but I just loved. I was fascinated by that. It was a big tradition Christmas Eve to put on that album, and when the album was done, I would then go for a stroll over to the local community rink and sit in the basket of the net at Joseph Welsh Elementary School in Red Deer, Alberta, and look into the sky, hoping I might catch a glimpse of Santa. So that has to be my favorite memory.
Yeah, what a vivid memory. Who was your hero when you were 10 years old?
Jacques Plante was a goaltender whose story I was smitten with. And it's funny because he came back to the National Hockey League right around the time I was 10. He had retired. He had won all those Stanley Cups with Montreal, Vezina trophies. He was an innovator, wore the mask most famously, but did a lot of other things. He would knit to calm himself. He used to wear long toques when he played in the Quebec senior leagues. And in fact, when he got to the NHL, there's a lot of controversy about him wearing a mask in the National Hockey League. Toe Blake wasn't sure he liked that idea, but he also was going to wear his toque in the National Hockey League. And Dick Irvin was the coach who said, no, bad idea, because if the toque falls off and you reach for it, you might miss the puck. So I love Jacques Plante, and he came back to the National Hockey League, and he was stellar as a 40-year-old. And just that combination of his imagination and his excellence, I looked up to him.
Wow. And what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
A teacher. I think the people who really impacted my life outside of mom and dad were teachers I had along the way. So my whole aim in life was to be an educator, and just got sidetracked by a call when I was in grade 10 to go to a local radio station and push buttons. A friend was sick and he couldn't do the task. So said, phone Ron, he'll appreciate the $27 for the 9-hour shift, and the rest is history. But yeah, teachers were a profound influence on an only child. I'm an only child. So, you know, without other siblings to mentor me, I just had mom and dad and my teachers.
What would you say is your life story in 6 words?
Let your guest be the star. We can flesh that out later, but that's it. Let your guest be the star.
I hope to live up to that right now.
Yeah, it's obviously the mantra for you and me and what we do.
Yeah. What is your greatest mistake, and what did you learn from it?
Well, when I saw that question, that's I will say, Mark, I can't imagine too many people answer truthfully, but for me, the mistakes I've made have all been the result of drinking too much. If I think back on, knock on wood, I haven't hurt anybody in my life, but the things that I've said I regret, or the recklessness or the carelessness with which I've conducted myself, have all been because I drank too much that day. So, and that was, and I know the ancillary is, what do you learn from such a thing? Is that it's very much akin to all the things that we wrestle with in life, such as maybe racism right now. You'll never eliminate desires, but you have to restrain, you have to sublimate, you have to really concentrate on that dance for all of your existence. I will never, knock on wood, eliminate wine and beer from my life, but I also have, prevalent in my thinking, it has you on occasion, so be very careful.
That's a very candid answer. I appreciate that. For what do you feel most grateful?
Living. Glad to Be Alive is a song by Blue Rodeo, and I would say that song probably is the one that I think about all the time. I just, I don't spend a whole lot of time staring into my phone. I spend a lot of time looking at the leaves and the sky, and just truly grateful for what a perk life is.
What has been the best year of your life so far, and why?
Yeah, I was going to say that Tom Brady, he was asked, you've got 4 Super Bowls, which is your favorite? He says the next one. And I think that's the way I would answer that question. No one year stands out as, a lot of great moments, of course, along the way, marriage and, first day on Hockey Night in Canada as a career path. But truthfully, I don't live much in the world of awards or benchmarks. I really kind of just said back there, I'm glad to be alive. And that means the next year is going to be a special one.
What was the toughest year of your life so far, and why?
Yeah, there again, I can't really think of, I can't think of anything. Like my whole thing, Mark, is expectations will kill you. So I've always luckily rolled with, Alex Trebek from Ottawa, of course. Alex has this saying, the key to happiness or secret to happiness isn't getting what you want, it's wanting what you get. And I honestly, nobody wants to get cancer. Nobody wants to get let go. And I have been a couple of times, either through a contract impasse or through, moving from the first line to the fourth line at Hockey Night in Canada. Things that, people sort of say to you, you must have been upset, but I wasn't. So I can't truthfully think of a year with regret.
That's a great outlook. We'll come back to that. I think that's really powerful. What would you say is the one person who's had the greatest impact on your life?
And there again, given time to think, you start to work through lots of names. I would say Mangesh Enamder, who is the doctor who saved my wife's life when she had a pulmonary embolism. And ironically, this is the anniversary of Carrie's pulmonary embolism as we record this, October the 9th, 2012, it occurred. I was playing beer league hockey and got the firefighters came and said, get to the hospital. And I went into ER and watched them save her life. So, with the benefit of hindsight, having a chance to look at that or think about that question, that's who I would cite because of Carrie's profound role in my life. But if I go back to, all the way along, without really having been a devout Christian, I just think the lessons of Jesus seem to kind of vicariously enter into my life. I was an altar boy as a child. I was in a separate school system. So I was consistently being schooled on some of the ethics of Jesus. And who cares, as Kurt Vonnegut says, whether he was God. If he said and did all the things that he did, that makes him the kind of person I'd like to be.
Very interesting. What is the most important lesson that you would share with other people?
Well, back to let your guest be the star. I think, that you kind of like the golden rule is a negotiation. The golden rule is treat others as you would want to be treated. I think you just want to treat others as is right. Coming to the conclusion of what's right is a difficult one. But I don't tend to barter in life. I tend to place myself in a position of one among 7 billion. And it's just vital to think of the other, try to put yourself in the shoes of the other and do what's right for the other.
What is the biggest factor that led you to where you are today?
Well, again, I got a lucky break in grade 10. And this is Beverly McLaughlin, who was kind of channeling Joseph Campbell when she said, you have to shed the life that you had set out for yourself to be able to accept the one that comes your way. And that happened to me. I told you I would love to have been a teacher. And then I was sitting in my backyard in grade 10 when my father came to the back door and said, Ronnie, there's a Martin Smith from CKRD FM on the phone. And I thought, oh, good God, what did I do last night drinking? Did I steal a hubcap or what happened? Thought the radio station was after me because of the news. But it was actually him offering me to come down to the radio station and learn how to push buttons. We had a very minimal operating setup at CKRD FM in Red Deer. It was effectively a CBC repeater station. So at the top of the clock, they needed a kid in Red Deer, Alberta to flip a lever, press a button that played a cartridge that said, this is CKRD 99.9 megahertz in Red Deer, Alberta, and then flip the lever to rejoin the CBC network. That's all I had to do 9 times over 9 hours. And for that, I received $3 an hour. And that, of course, completely redirected my life. I got to work every second Sunday as a result of that one gig. And before you know it, they asked me to read the news at midnight on that station. And then they asked me to be a DJ, all while in high school. They just kept putting me into different positions to succeed. And I ended up in broadcasting.
Yeah. What would people be most surprised to learn about you?
Well, yeah, this is a funny one too. Told you I drink too much. I'll tell you, my nickname is Bunny. And I think, the Bunny, Bunny, and I think Carrie gave it to me, but, back to it's all well and good to quote, and I could list a lot of authors and Jesus and so forth, and my parents, but it seems to be the rabbits along the way, Thumper in Bambi and Fiver in Watership Down. Bugs Bunny, for the humor and kind of the lessons, the ethics. A lot of rabbits seem to have found their way into my education. So Bunny as a nickname fits.
Bunny MacLean.
It could definitely be to do with the buck teeth too, but it's supposed to be for those other reasons.
Okay. What is your secret talent?
Yeah, I hope I don't sound vain in saying this, but I do think because of the radio training, my secret talent is having the ability to know what 14 seconds feels like versus 43 seconds. So if we're coming to the end of a telecast and my 43-second closing comment is suddenly reduced to 14, who I used to work with, so it would usually be 4 seconds that I had. And I think, mentally editing on the fly, a kind of an innate sense of time, which was given to me or taught to me by being a disc jockey and speaking over the bed of music that precedes the vocals. But I did that for 9 full years and 2 part-time. So almost 12 years I was around the DJing thing. And that gave me a sense of the clock that not everybody has. That would be my little talent.
That's really interesting. I want to come back to that because I think as broadcasters, we learn something about time and how finite it is that you don't always have that opportunity in other walks of life.
You would have it obviously, Mark, just killing yourself for the length of your question, or sweating the length of the answer. It's funny. I had a call from Preston Manning, who was running the Reform Party, of course, and was in Ottawa. And he was going to be guest hosting on a prominent station in Ottawa, the morning show. And he phoned me and he said, Ron, I'd like to interview you on my show. And I said, why would Preston Manning want to speak to me? He says, I want to speak to you, Ron, about those little bumper sticker puns you have at the end of the coach's corners. You have about 8 seconds in which to sort of summarize. And you seem to be able to do it with something memorable, something that, a person could latch onto. And in our game, politics, that's gold, that little 5 to 10 second quote that can be a soundbite for the news. So I'd like to interview you about where you got that. And that was the genesis of it. And again, it all comes down to a lucky, you have to have, I guess, the gift of the gab and the sense of the clock. And if you have those two in concert, you'll get through that.
Yeah. What's your boldest prediction for the future?
That we will have a pretty quick cure to cancer. I think the fallout of the COVID-19 research will be a way to cope with cancer.
Wow. I like that. What would be the message of your commencement address?
Which I've done, of course, several times. And that is, it's not enough to sit and look in the mirror and tell yourself that you have this, that you have to rely on your intuition. Yes, that's important. You have to use your imagination. You have to use your memory, your history, your ethics, your emotion. A lot of this is the teachings of John Ralston Saul, whom you know. And I think that's the biggest thing I would forward is a sense of learning. There's always 2 teachers in the room. You may be one of them, but you're not the only one. So it's a little bit of humility mixed with all the ways that you come to an informed opinion. And it's just critical to never quit learning. That would be the gist of the speech.
Never quit learning. I like that. What has been a recent epiphany for you? Is there anything?
Yes. Well, I'm embarrassed about this one in a way, because I've always felt that because I have, 2 eyes that make one in sight, and I have a heart and a brain, and I'm a human construct, and I'm a human being, that women and me are alike, and that Black people and me are alike, and that we all are the same. And it was a false equivalency that I had failed to understand, that until you've had the experience of the other gender, a sexual preference, and however you identify, whoever you love. I didn't understand that as I should have. I had kind of the naive, maybe because of Thumper the Rabbit and Bambi, I had a kind of a naive take on how we're all the same, which of course is folly.
Yeah, that's a great lesson, and one that many of us, and I hope more people learn in this time. We all have that opportunity to learn that right now, I think. And for people like you and me, I've made the comment. I recently realized, if I didn't grow up as a white guy with a British last name, half the things I've done, more than half of the things I've had the opportunity to do in my life, probably wouldn't have been afforded to me, right?
For sure. Yeah, white male privilege. It's when you say it, it immediately shuts down the conversation. It's so learning. This is another epiphany: is learning how to communicate these insights and this wisdom that you're getting without offending or throwing up walls to the conversation, because the very one that you're trying to reach with this enlightenment will tend to turn you off. As you and I both know, if you want to succeed in this business, tell people what they want to hear, tell people what they like. But if you're truly responsible to your audience, you will love your audience, which is to tell them something they don't need to hear. But you got to find a way. It's really, that's the art, is to make comfortable, to make less threatening, less shaming the revelation.
Yeah. That's a great point. This might be the most unfair question I ask of you, because you have read so many books, but which book are you most likely to recommend to others?
Yeah, I would go with Harold Bloom, Bloom, and the book is called Where Shall Wisdom Be Found? I'll put it up for you, Mark. I know it's hard with the lighting, but anyway, it's a book where in each chapter he compares literary wisdom writers. So as an example, I'll just get you the table of contents here. My favorite chapter is where he compares Cervantes and Shakespeare. And the whole crux of that chapter is the power of conversation and where the wisdom is found. As an example, in Cervantes, the story of Sancho Panza, who is the peasant farmer, and Don Quixote, who is a retired school teacher, who at the age of 70 decides he wants to be a knight and go around the world saving damsels in distress. That book, the hijinks between those two, because Don Quixote starts out, his first mission fails, and all the townspeople say, well, Don Quixote, you need a squire. No successful errant knight has ever gone along without a squire. So there's a peasant farmer down here, Sancho Panza, you could hire him, and he would be a great running mate. And whenever they would go out and tilt at windmills and do whatever they were doing to try and save the world, they would go back and debrief, what the hell went wrong there? And that's where the wisdom is revealed. And that technique that Cervantes used is identical to the technique that Shakespeare used. He had Hamlet, Prince Hal was discussing with Falstaff what went wrong. And I love that dynamic of conversation. But as an example, in the book by Harold Bloom, part 1, the first chapter is the Hebrews, Job, and Ecclesiastes. The second chapter is the Greeks, Plato versus Homer. So he compares the writing of Plato and the writing of Homer. Then comes Cervantes and Shakespeare. And later on, he has Montaigne versus Francis Bacon, Samuel Johnson, who I love, and Goethe, who I love, Emerson versus Nietzsche, Freud versus Proust. I mean, just incredible wisdom gleaned in that book. So that's the one I'd pick.
Okay. I'm intrigued by that. I've got to get that book. All right, Ron, thank you for answering those questions. We're going to start digging deep with Ron MacLean right after this. We're just going to take a quick break so I can tell you a little bit more about the presenting sponsor of Digging Deep, ZenBooks. ZenBooks is Canada's go-to cloud accounting firm. They are not your typical accounting firm. I know the founders, Colin and Eric. I've worked with them for several years. And here's why I think you should consider working with them too. First of all, they bring a fresh, unique, modern approach to what is a very old-fashioned industry. These guys were working remotely and in the cloud long before it became cool. ZenBooks also uses technology to your advantage. I think this is really important. They give you the tools and analysis you need to monitor your business in real time. That's so valuable right now when everything changes so quickly. Yes, they're a virtual accounting firm, but that doesn't mean they're offshore, and it doesn't mean they're inattentive. ZenBooks combines the efficiency and effectiveness of a cloud accounting service with all the benefits that you'd want from a trusted advisor, high-level advice, and strategic support. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if you work with ZenBooks. You'll probably start out taking advantage of their cutting-edge cloud accounting solutions, but in the long run, I think you'll stay with them because of their strategic guidance and problem solving. Among their core values, they specifically list being candid and proactive. Isn't that exactly what you want from a trusted advisor? Look, even if you're already working with an accountant or a bookkeeper, or you have some accounting staff on your team, I think you should still talk to ZenBooks and learn more about their tools and their expertise. Check out ZenBooks at zenbooks.ca. That's zenbooks.ca. Digging Deep is all about helping you make better decisions, and so is Abacus Data. Most leaders struggle to connect with and engage their audiences. Why is that? It's because they aren't sure how they think and feel and how they will react. Abacus Data can give you the strategic insights you need to make better decisions and to make them confidently. Here's a good example. A major national union was recently negotiating a new agreement for its thousands of members. This had the potential to be a very difficult process. There were many competing interests. So they brought in Abacus Data to conduct thorough and detailed research of their members to learn exactly where they stood, what they were thinking, what they wanted. And as a result, they were able to secure a strong new deal that was accepted overwhelmingly in a national vote. Abacus Data helps all of its clients understand what's really happening in the minds of their employees, clients, and stakeholders. They help them avoid costly blind spots. And they're really good at what they do. In fact, Abacus Data was one of the most accurate pollsters in the 2019 Canadian federal election. Make the one decision that will improve all of your other decisions. Let Abacus Data help you move forward with confidence and clarity. Go to abacusdata.ca. That's abacusdata.ca. Ron, once again, thank you so much for joining us. And I got lots of questions I want to ask you, but just arising out of what we just talked about, I think one of the things that I really admire about you came out in some of your answers, especially around when I was asking you, about the toughest year of your life, the best year of your life. And you have this kind of zero-based outlook, I sense, that, you're not expecting a lot from life. And that I think in there is somewhere is the secret to happiness in a way, right? You've had this great career, but it hasn't been without its moments. You had this sort of famous contract dispute many years ago, and then you were replaced as the host of Hockey Night in Canada. Then you got your job back after a couple of years. So it hasn't been without its challenges. And yet I think you've approached it all with this real dignity that arises out of not having high expectations, right?
I remember being 12 years old and I was in my bedroom, and I mentioned to you, I'm an only child. So house is usually pretty quiet. My father was a shift worker, so who knows when he was away, and mom worked a little bit part-time. But I remember thinking, what a lucky guy. You have two parents who love and care for you. You have a good group of friends. What could be better than this? And I wish it didn't have to change. I knew that was a little bit Peter Pan principle, but I had that gratitude, and I never lost that. My sort of take has always been, well, what the heck did you do to me that I can't fix, or that I can't try to work my way through? So, I mean, if I die, I die. And if I get a disease, as I said in my little memoir, Cornered, I was too young to write a memoir, but I wanted to write at a time when my dad was still alive, to kind of just go through our story as a family, our little family. But I remember saying late in the book that when the diagnosis comes, I hope I handle it well. That's it. Chichi Rodriguez, the golfer, used to say something. He said, I always made a little prayer to myself before a significant putt. So I didn't pray that I'd make the putt. I prayed that I'd handle it well if I missed the putt. And I just love that. I've always had that just desire to try and live my life without expectations. I mean, you have pride in performance. You have a complete discipline about the importance of your work. You have to stand by it, but it isn't everything by any stretch. It's it's just, a total blessing to be part of that street out there, those trees over there. Just a craziest thing that we're a part of, and since I can't figure it out, there's no sense sweating it.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. I mean, just the likelihood of being alive in the first place, everything else is a bonus after that. And yet it's so easy to get caught in the trap of, I should have asked this, or I should have done that, or I could have done a better job, or why am I not getting credit for this, or why isn't this person noticing me? Those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, I don't want to forgive. I don't want to forgive in the sense, myself or anyone, with a lack of responsibility or a sense of apathy. So there's, again, everything's right. A dance. It is a little balancing act, but I think it's vital to forgive yourself, and it's vital to forgive others. And again, that goes back to, I wonder, Mark, as I say, I was an altar boy. I remember a really funny scene. I was an altar boy in Nova Scotia. So my father was Air Force. We moved around a lot, and he happened to be stationed at CFS Mill Cove, and I was the altar boy, and the Archbishop of Halifax was coming into our little community to do the Mass. And we decided to mix our choirs. We had a kind of a folk choir that did the modern Mass, because we were trying to attract younger kids to come to church. And then we had the traditional Latin-based Mass with a typical choir. And so we put the choirs together, and they were going to sing like George Harrison, Beatles, right? And I was the altar boy, and when they started singing Beatles, I didn't normally hear that at the church service, and I was quite into it, and I started singing along, and I could hear the Archbishop hollering at me, Ronnie, because he needed the wine and the water for a moment that it was part of the sacrament, and I was missing my cue. It's funny, I was a really good, very responsible altar boy normally, but I entirely missed it in the moment that I was singing along to the Beatles, and yeah. That was just again, that Christian part of my upbringing taught me that kind of value system that was just born of gratitude or appreciation and togetherness.
So it sounds like you have learned a lot of lessons from religion in your life. Are you a
Mhm.
religious person now?
No, I don't go to church. I did well when mom died in 2008. My father lived for another 7 to 8 years, and I would take him to church. That was something we could do together on Sunday mornings, and ultimately he ended up in a seniors residence, and so did the priest from the church, St. Andrew's in Oakville. So I would, and Father Peter Waters is actually an incredible story. Not to get sidetracked, but Frank O'Day, owner of the Second Cup coffee shops, who was an alcoholic,
Yeah.
was saved by Peter Waters. Peter Waters was also an alcoholic who, in his 30s, got over his situation, and then became an ordained priest in his 50s. But he was a real pragmatic guy and a funny guy. Told jokes at church. So I loved the 8 years that my dad was still alive, and I would go back to church and just sit. It was really fascinating to sit in a community of people, and that's a humbling experience, I think. And much like my hockey playing, where I'm in the dressing room and we come from all backgrounds and socioeconomic considerations. I always love that, balance that comes from sitting with a group that, there's no status anxiety in that. And that, Mark, is a big part back to what you were saying about, when I've had a few career setbacks, I really don't feel any status anxiety. That's a book by Alex de Botton. And it's a very well constructed book about, the pressure we feel to be somebody. Are you somebody? Are you successful? How do you define success? Certainly my definitions have nothing to do with the compensation I have or the career that I have. So, and that I think a lot of that, as you say, came from just being around a church group, and not everything about you goes without saying. Not everything about organized religion is above board, but many of the lessons certainly are good lessons.
So when you say that, I really sense how genuine it is in you that you don't define your success based on these external factors and those kinds of things, and that when you had setbacks in your career, you had the right outlook about them. Lots of people will say that in the moment, right? Because they think that's what they're supposed to say. Oh,
Right.
I'm not offended. I'm not disappointed. You would see that in sports, in interviewing athletes all the time when somebody is demoted from the first line to the fourth line, or benched, or doesn't get the starting assignment in the playoff game or whatever. I'm just here to help the team, but in their heart they don't mean it. In your case, it really feels genuine when you say those things. So how do you define success?
Well, again, by empowering or uplifting someone else. I learned as an only child that all my brothers and sisters were my neighbors, and to be liked and to help them like one another. I did a lot of, especially because I would move into different situations. I moved to Red Deer, Alberta when I was 12. Actually went to Edmonton for a year as an 11-year-old. But by then I'd lived 5 years in Yukon Territory. I'd lived 6 years in Nova Scotia and a little bit in British Columbia. So I wasn't quite as parochial as my Red Deer friends. They were kind of they had grown in a situation where they had their sensibilities that were very much based on a Red Deer, Alberta upbringing, the energy sector, and so forth. And I would try to explain different takes on life. What it was like to be part of Trudeau Mania when we lived in Whitehorse, Yukon. What it was like to be part of the fisheries as opposed to the oil patch. And certainly my ethics had been illuminated by those experiences in different parts of the country. Certainly didn't experience French Quebec. Certainly didn't experience many religions outside of Christianity, which was like just amazed when I moved to Toronto, and to learn about Buddhism, to learn about Judaism, to learn about Sikhism. None of that was part of my growing up. Terrible, but nothing you can do about it, right? You just have to go with what you're given. So anyway, I had that. I was always the captain of hockey teams. I'd been forced to make friends because of being an only child and being uprooted a lot. These were, again, just luckily training for a life that kind of channels you into those roles. President of the Students' Union, because why? Because you're happy to put yourself out on a limb. Other people are maybe, in a nest or a cocoon in that kind of an upbringing, don't have that sense of daring.
Interesting. Now, speaking of your parents and career setbacks, I read something about how you learned from observing your mom quit a job on
Mhm.
principle. Can you tell that story?
For sure. I don't want to mention the name of the gentleman who was her boss, but I remember she really enjoyed, she worked at Pittsburgh Paints and Glass in Red Deer, and she was essentially the receptionist, but mom was kind of a receptionist that runs the business. People would come in and explain they needed a front windshield or they needed a living room window or a skylight. No matter what they needed, my mother was fully aware of the inventory in the Red Deer shop or how to access it from elsewhere in the world. And these were the days without internet, it was microfiche and, much more simple form of researching products. But my mom knew where to find everything and anything. She knew dimensions. She had a great memory. So I have a lot of my mom's gift for short-term memory. I have a good short-term memory, and she had it. Whatever the customer wanted, she would, while she was dealing with that specific customer, really be good and attentive to their needs. And somehow, one day, the boss was thanking the staff at a little get-together, and he didn't mention mom. And my mom got on the bus back up to our house in Red Deer, and she quit. She quit the job just because the boss had slighted her. And we needed the money. My mom and dad didn't make a lot, and I was involved in all kinds of sports. And so she was really upset. She sat on the couch saying to me, Ronnie, now I'm like 12, 13 years old. She said, Ronnie, it was an impulsive thing that I did, and it's a proud thing that I did, and it's a terrible thing that I did. And I said, no, Mom, in the end, he did disrespect you, and I'm proud of you that you took a stand. And I imagine I'm 13 years old. I don't know why the hell, but I was just trying to make her feel good. I think that's more, I have a natural bent towards trying to uplift and make you understand that, okay, maybe you're wrong, but so what? You'll rally and come out of it in a different, way. But I did like her, stand by your work. Nuala O'Foylan is a great writer from Ireland. She's gone now, but Nuala wrote 2 books. First one was called Are You Somebody? And the second was Almost There. She is part of others, but those were her memoirs. And that was her big thing, is you have to stand by your work. And my mom did. My mom was extreme. I wasn't going to have a tantrum when they said, Ron, you're not hosting Hockey Night in Canada anymore. That isn't disrespecting me. That it's the same as we're going through our, attempt now to, and this is Nuala O'Foylan's teaching, but as we work through social injustice and try to create a world that's more equitable, it means Ron and Mark are going to have to allow for opportunities for others. That doesn't mean that we're going to be substituted for or that something's going to be taken away. It just means things are going to be added. And how that gets done is again, it's really important to know how to do that. But with my mom would teach me that kind of thing too. So when I say I was comforting her, gosh, mom was, she would be a fabulous voice and sounding board in terms of ethics and equity and equality.
But it sounds like you learned both the principle of taking a stand and sticking up for yourself, but also the risks of an impulsive decision at the same time, right? Right.
Obviously in the case of when we went through what we went through, Don Cherry and I, and that was the mistake that was made in November of 2019, where Don had projected an attitude on immigrants, and now we were called to task for it, and the option was apologize. And I chose to apologize immediately, and Don didn't. Well, now, that I knew that the backlash on me was going to be, well, how could you not support Don, your dear friend? And I had to choose ethics. I had to choose what was right. And I guess my mom's little example in that moment, even though, it cost her some money, she was right to challenge the person in charge who didn't understand the scope of what she was doing for the shop and the business. That was my mom's spine stiffening. It was an invaluable part of, again, if you're strong in your own convictions, there's not much anyone else can ever do to you to harm you.
Yeah, and just to talk about that moment, I wasn't actually going to bring it up and to talk about it in great detail, but I think one of the things that I've observed in you is that you have a very public job, and in one respect, you're mostly talking about hockey and sports and events like that. But it's such a cultural signpost in this country. It's the Hockey Night in Canada and the work that you do becomes this kind of gathering place for Canadians, and so everything is magnified, and you're in the spotlight, and you're judged on everything you say and don't say, and how you react, and maybe a facial expression, and all of those kinds of things. And I think there is, for people who are in the public eye, there is a choice between, when you are called to task on something, reacting defensively and digging in and pushing back, or using it as an opportunity to listen, and that you don't necessarily have to capitulate, but you can try to understand the other perspective and learn from it. And I think you've tried to do that in those circumstances.
Well, for sure. And to be clear on the Don Cherry situation, I'm not saying that I'm 100% confident we handled it right, or I handled it right. That Beverly McLaughlin, you did the book launch for her book, Truth Be Told, and she tells a great story in the book about James Keegster was a Holocaust denier teaching school in central Alberta, where I grew up. He was teaching 20 minutes up the road. And Beverly, as a member of the Supreme Court, 9 members, when they decided whether or not his teachings were hate crimes, she was a dissenting opinion. She sort of backed him on his right to have freedom of speech and the ability to speak his mind. I believe she said in the book she ultimately changed her mind on that, but that was a position she took. And it sounds like a very central Alberta take. She's southern Alberta, Pincher Creek, home of Matthew Halton. You must remember to ask me about David Halton at some point, Mark, if I forget.
Sure.
But anyway, Beverly, for sure, that just shows you how complicated these issues are. It's not, who knows what's right? When you're making a decision, generally you try to think of the larger community. So what made the Don Cherry gaffe so complicated is it was a larger community that was sort of speaking out and calling us on an ethical, bit of misconduct. Within the hockey circles, they'd have closed ranks, and probably it would have all been forgotten. But this went outside the hockey circle, and that's tough, because the hockey circle is the one watching Coach's Corner and Hockey Night. So I really had to, again, back to our conversation, how do I communicate, look, what we did was wrong. We needed to apologize. I wish Don could have apologized, but I respect that he didn't. I'm not judging him, and try to maintain his dignity and yours. If you as a viewer feel outraged that he was let go because he decided, he effectively walked away. To be clear, he chose not to apologize, which is given the ultimatum, it was his choice. But anyway, that was a great exercise that you and I deal with constantly. Is how to confront ethical dilemmas. I was saying, when we were going through the social justice, the players in all the professional sports chose to take a few days in solidarity and step aside. And there was quite a backlash against the NHL for not joining the Milwaukee Bucks in the NBA that night, even though some NBA players played. The league was quickly criticized on social media for not having backed the Bucks. And I went to the hypothetical philosophical question, which is, 2 young accountants are hired by a firm. And within days, they realize the way it works with artificial intelligence and money being made. And the fact of the matter is, they could embezzle from this firm without anybody ever knowing. And it wouldn't hurt the firm, because the ways they make money are just multiple. And so the 2 accountants, independent of one another, find out you can embezzle, and no one will ever find out. The first accountant says, no, it's ethically wrong, I'm not doing it. The second accountant stews about a week to 2 over this idea of, wow, sure use the money and think of the good I could do with the money. I could help others with that money, and no one's going to feel the pain of this situation. And the philosophical, ethical question is, and ultimately that person also decides, can't do it, it's wrong. And the ethical question is, which is the better person? And the Greeks would say the first person, who has morally is decisive and convinced and virtuous without regard for temptation or desire, etc.
Right, which is a more
But
absolute kind of black and white
yes,
decision. Yeah.
by the time we get to modern philosophy, they lean towards the second person being the better person for having looked at all the different temptations and desires and to wrestle with it and to be responsible because they don't think virtue is attainable. It's policeable, if that's a word, but you need to sit with these things and you need to go through them and think responsibly and then make your decision. And that but in the Twitterverse, no chance for that.
Yeah.
Modern philosophy and the Twitterverse are at odds. Twitterverse is more of the ancient Greeks, yes or no, now. And I don't particularly like where that's gone.
Yeah, and that's why I think that there's a powerful lesson in that, because I think there is this pressure today to have immediate answers to things. We put that on politicians. A politician, when asked a question, cannot say, "Well, give me some time to think about that." That might be a preferable outcome and might lead to a more thoughtful answer, a more considered answer. That's not an acceptable thing to do. And so again, I come back to that thing that I think you always try to approach things from a place of learning rather than simply defending what you already said or attacking the other person or creating some equivalencies or those kinds of things, which have become, I think, all too normal in both politics and social media today.
Right. Couldn't agree more. I just think, the more you defend or entrench or try to explain yourself without just conversation, it all comes back to let's do whatever we can to facilitate more conversation and again, using all those other things, ethics and common sense and imagination and emotion, reason, huge. If we sort through it by attacking it several different ways, then we will come to a far greater conclusion and or at least consensus, which is important.
Now, I wanted to ask you about this gift you have for making connections between different things. How much of that is just sort of the way your brain works, and how much of it is preparation and because I know, you draw these connections. You have a great memory. Obviously, I'm always amazed that the stuff you remember about our previous conversations, for example, even though we don't talk that often. So, how does that all work for you? How much of it is preparation? How much of it is just sort of instinct and the gift of memory?
Well, I think you hone your craft and your talents. And so that whole idea of connection and stories, it's interesting because, we're going into the new series, hopefully, of Battle of the Blades on CBC. We had a COVID situation somewhere within the crew, so we're 1 week delayed. But they were saying as we prepared for the new season, less storytelling and more stakes and strategies. We're going to make it more a sporting competition and get away from storytelling. And I do miss stories. And Beverly McLaughlin, funny enough, the power of stories in her litigation and in her early career. I think for you and me, it's by our bent, being journalists, we love the stories. I just, like today, Mark, I was walking. So my wife had her pulmonary embolism on October the 9th, 2012. And so I wanted to see how many days has it been since Carrie had that pulmonary embolism. And it turns out it's 2,923 days. And I thought it's kind of a boring number. I mean, I could say Ken Dryden, LeBron James. I don't know. I could find different ways to rationalize the number of, weeks and minutes and seconds to try and find numbers that are serendipitous. So she has been now 2,923 days since that event, is what they call it in the medical community, where her life was saved. But I thought 3,000 would have been a nice round number. I wonder, when is the 3,000th day from the event? And it happens to be Christmas Day. So that, then I can give her a Christmas gift, 3,000 days from your PE. And I just love that. I'm always, when I'm walking the dog, I'm thinking along those lines, what are the connections? What are the stories that I could create out of just trying to say, congrats. It's been a while since you were sick. And in our, like the Beverly McLaughlin book, I just sit and read it, whether it's Frank McCardle, her second husband, who had played against Rocket Richard and the Montreal Canadiens. If I ever see Beverly McLaughlin, I was born on the day Rocket scored his last goal in the NHL. So I'd have a little story to tell her about that Frank would enjoy. And that's That's just
Yeah.
for me. I think that comes from my radio background. I had to introduce the hit songs for weeks on end, over and over and over again. I'd introduce, here's Debbie Boone, You Light Up My Life. And as romantic as a full moon in June, or I'd have to find a different way to introduce that same foolish song. And that begat by nature, okay, you're going to have to learn to create stories or puns or phrases. That was the art of being a personality in radio, and it sort of carried over into what I do now.
That's so interesting. I have to admit, I feel that really resonates with me, because I have this thing with numbers too. Like I went for lunch with my dad on the day that I was exactly half his age. And we also went for lunch, I think, on the day I was 10,000 days old, which is about 31 years.
Yeah.
And I ran a marathon on the day that I was 42.2 years old, because it's 42.2 kilometers. Right?
Correct.
So, yeah. So I like those kinds of things too.
Oh, I think your marathon experience, and again, I mentioned I have kind of a good sense of the clock. You'd have it, right? You would know without even thinking, you would know I've been out here 15 minutes. I've been out here 45 minutes. That happens to athletes as well. So,
yeah.
And it's, and those are all, again, Mark, you wonder about our brain, right? What it can do is just, the two things that fascinate me is one is with hard work, you can come up with this stuff. Two is with completely escaping the hard work, you can come up with it. As Townes Van Zandt was one of my favorite singer-songwriters. He's the Texas troubadour. He's called Raging Alcoholic, died at 52, bless his heart. But, he would say they come out of the air, these lyrics. And I do believe in that. It's uncanny how when you take a break or a respite, that's when somehow the divine intervention occurs and these numbers pop into your head.
Yeah, or words, or whatever, the solution to a problem or something. Yeah, absolutely. But I want to come back to that, I think for both sports and broadcasting, there is a sense of how time is finite, which people in other professions and other worlds may not experience. And one of the things I've learned from that, and maybe you have too, is just that sense that we often seek perfection in whatever we're working on, but sometimes there are limitations, and you can only work with the time that you have to get done what you need to get done, right? And if the segment's going to be over in 30 seconds, that's all the time you have to work with. If the game's going to be over in 5 minutes, you're not thinking about how do we make those 5 minutes perfect. You're just thinking about how do we complete our task here and get it done, and then move on to the next thing. And I think there's great value in that sometimes is overlooked by people who have a perception of more unlimited time, and they keep working to try to make something better rather than just accept it at a certain level and move on.
For sure. Brené Brown, you familiar with her work?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's a lot of her teaching on, mostly she's on vulnerability, which is, kind of an acceptance or a forgiveness of yourself for all of your little quirks. And but I think she's very strong on that idea of, forget the perfect. But you have to, I think the secret is for sure your preparation. You want it, you'll be more comfortable if you're well prepared. And you learn as you go, okay, I may have 4 minutes to tell this story, or I may have 40 seconds. So better have two versions. That's what you get. I'll never forget when that Mangesh Inamdar in ER. So the night my wife had the pulmonary embolism, story that I keep going on to that
story. Well, I wanted you to tell the story anyway, so maybe now's a good time.
Because it's the anniversary, right? It's kind of fresh in my head. Of course.
Yeah.
So that day, Carrie had been suffering what felt like cold or flu-like symptoms for a little bit of time, and shortness of breath when she would run. And she's run several marathons as well, probably 7 to 10 marathons. So it was really strange that she was having these issues. And she didn't know that these were symptoms of a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot to the heart or lungs. In her case, it hit the lungs. Massive blood clot. So it was a Tuesday evening back in 2012 in October. I went out to play beer league hockey, and she wasn't feeling great, but she was going to pour herself a hot bath and soak for a while. I went to play hockey at 6:30 in the evening, so an early game. And I remember I was coming back off the ice to my bench, and there were 4 firefighters on the bench at this little rink in Oakville, Ontario. And I thought, oh my God, one of my colleagues has had a heart attack, because 2 of them had had previous cardiac conditions. But they were actually looking for me, and they said, Ron, we have just whisked Carrie, your wife, over to Oakville Trafalgar Memorial Hospital. You should get there. Everything's going to be okay. You don't have to rush, because they knew I would, probably get in an accident. It was not far, 5 minutes away. I got to the hospital. I walk into ER. There's that look that, the nurses and the people at triage, everybody had that look. Here he comes. We're expecting him. And into the ER unit I went, and there were 2 doctors and 9 nurses working frantically on Carrie. Now, Carrie was conscious, hadn't passed out. Her O2 levels were negligible, not compatible with life, but we didn't know what they were because she had false fingernails and they couldn't get a proper O2 reading. And they were just frantic. They were doing portable x-rays and portable ultrasound and inserting a catheter. And I ended up holding a warm blanket over her. It was kind of like a Jiffy Pop aluminum astronaut blanket that they put over top of the patient because her blood pressure had dropped to 30/15 and her O2, God knows what it was. And she was freezing to death and she was throwing up. So I had a bedpan and I was catching the vomit and I was holding this heater, unit that inserted into that aluminum blanket over top of her and just talking to her, trying to keep her calm. And she kept complaining her lips were dry. And anyway, Dr. Enamber and another Dr. Warren, they were together trying to do the diagnostic tree to sort out, was she having a blood clot situation or was she having an aneurysm? Just the opposite. Was she hemorrhaging internally? And she wasn't really presenting with sore leg or chest like a blood clot. So they were thinking more of the latter. But ultimately, through the portable x-ray, they saw one of the ventricles of her heart was the different size, and they put 2 and 2 together, and they figured out it's a blood clot. And now Dr. Enamber calls for a thrombolytic treatment, which is a series of drugs, including, I would say, warfarin, heparin, that nurses would know better than me, but plus a saline solution. And so they had 3 nurses were going to apply this drip. It's like chemo to bust the blood clot and hopefully have it happen in time that she doesn't have the heart attack and die. Meanwhile, she's got all these vials going into her of different medicines, including what they call the big guns, which are to mitigate the pain when she dies on the spot. He said when she walked through the door, he saw death come through the door, was convinced she would die. 50 and over with a P is not easy. So anyway, he starts to apply the treatment and he says to the 3 nurses, Dwayne, what is your drug and what is your order of administration? What's the protocol? And Sarah, what is your drug? What is your order of administration? What is the protocol? And I forget the 3rd nurse's name. And he said, let's go through that again. Dwayne, what is your drug? What is your dosage? What is your order of administration? Fascinating. And to sit and watch that happen was just, that has to be the greatest thing I've ever witnessed. We didn't have a child, so didn't get that experience. This is mine. And just to see that doctor, they say under pressure, you sink to the level of your training. We didn't know. Once he found out, he went to the computer to sort of figure out how to expedite the thrombolytic treatment to make it happen fast, to expedite this healing that needed to happen in short order. What an experience. And blessedly, it all worked out. And, Carrie had a lot of PTSD, but no residual heart damage. And yeah, so we'll celebrate that today.
Yeah, what a thing to celebrate. That's wonderful.
So Mark, and sorry to interrupt, but it reminds me, you and I had a great interview after the Humboldt tragedy when I went to Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon and got to go into ER 24 hours to 48 hours after the crash. And again, I hearkened back to my experience with Dr. Enamder and the staff at Oakville Trafalgar and kind of felt comfortable knowing how great the situation that the parents and these hockey players find themselves, at this lucky opportunity of all that wisdom that the doctors and nurses have. What a comfortable and great feeling it is to walk into ER once you've been there and seen something that like I saw.
Yeah, that is. I love the way you describe that because it's a situation where obviously you're incredibly fearful and anxious and maybe even panicking, but you're able to kind of put yourself in the hands of and just almost fall backwards into the arms of people who have this extraordinary knowledge and experience and can handle the situation calmly, even if you can't, right?
A paradise built in hell. Rebecca Solnit had that line. And yeah, that's what it felt like. It seems strange, to find it a paradise, but it is.
Yeah. And so actually that leads, I wanted to come back to the issue of preparation, because, and obviously there's a great story there of how doctors prepare. And we had astronaut Jenny Seide Gibbons on the podcast recently, and she talked about how astronauts never prepare for a good day in space. They have to prepare for so many other things that could go wrong where they're out there all by themselves. But tell me about your preparation. What do you do to prepare? Because you're ready for, you need to be ready for all kinds of different scenarios when you're on the air live.
Well, mine is pretty much identical to yours. It's just endless reading and preparing notes and finding ways and mental triggers too to back off. I sort of spend some of my time researching to get the information, because I don't know if I agree with this idea that you never ask a question you don't know the answer to, but it sure helps to know when you're hearing a falsehood. So you want to be prepared. I feel like that was really significant during the period, the extended period of labor negotiations between the professional Players Association and the National Hockey League, when until they broke the union in 2006, when it was quite a fair fight, and you needed to understand both sides. That was preparation. You were learning. I read so many books on sports labor that now I don't read. I don't need them anymore. That story has been told, and as I say, the horse has been let out of the barn with the elimination of the salary cap. Really, the crux of that fight was about a cap, and once the cap was accepted, that issue kind of went to bed. But you had to learn and interview as many people as you could and read as much as you could to kind of prepare yourself, and then you kind of have a little bit of self-talk. Okay, Ron, let them finish their answer, which I don't always do, but you try to, and try to back off, and again, let your guest be the star. So those are my three sort of rules of preparation: is research, and then empower
and
listen.
I wanted to talk about that in the context of some of your interviews with NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman, because I read something about what you learned from some of those experiences. Those are some of the more discussed interviews that you've had, because they've gotten a little testy at times. And I know there have been a bunch of factors that led to that, including getting back to the finite amount of time that you have. You're doing a short interview about a big topic with a very important person in the game. And so you got some feedback, and you tried to learn to balance all of the needs of everyone in those interviews, I guess, right? Including the audience, right? What did you take away from some of that?
Well, it's a source of great frustration, Mark, because first of all, I have the greatest respect for Gary Bettman. He's incredibly well schooled in his job. I just found, at core, there was a real balancing act between even the CBC. Like Peter Mansbridge told a story about he's only ever declined one interview, and it was because the guest asked to know the questions in advance, and Peter said, "We don't do that." And the guest surprised me. It was Al Gore. So Al Gore, who wrote Inconvenient Truth and is Democrat, and I would have expected that more from someone that's kind of, in my mind, and again I'm judging, but I would have thought that would have come from Donald Trump or someone of the sort who tends to want to control the interview. In the case of the National Hockey League, there was tremendous pressure to be a good partner, to be not just Rogers, even the CBC would lean on me to be a good partner in this business interest and joint venture. And I understand that it's that, but I just had in my mind this quarrel that, well, wait a minute, I know I work for CBC and I know I work with the National Hockey League, but ultimately we work for the listener or the viewer, don't we? I mean, our ratings are what drive our sales. Nothing more. I mean, it's all well and good to have the Maple Leafs, but if the Maple Leafs aren't drawing 2 million or 2.5 million, then our sales are going to be hurt by that. So you have to do what's right by the viewer. And that has been that to this day, that is a source of consternation. I still feel tremendous pressure to avoid certain topics at certain times. And I don't get much support to go ahead and just do a free or unshackled interview. So that's frustration, nothing to do with Gary, but it kind of manifested itself, I think, in our testy relationship because poor Gary, I was maybe taking it out on him a little bit that I want so badly to go here and I don't want to just be a good partner. I want to be a good interviewer today. And, people will say, well, if you want to do that, go work for the Athletic.
Yeah. But I think you got to the right place in the end with that, right? Like I think you've kind of gotten to the other side of that a little bit.
Yes,
fair to
yeah,
say?
yeah. You're right, Mark. I think I was starting to come, as Shirley Najak, a dear friend, producer at Hockey Night in Canada, say, Ron, you're coming at it with a black heart. Go at it with a red heart, and you'll get there. And that's what I've kind of learned is to, okay, quit having an axe to grind, because that's going to serve no purpose. Neither you nor the viewer nor Gary. And yes, I have matured in the sense, but I will tell you, that there are still times when I feel, it was that's all part of, I think, where this push now for social justice, the lessons of the last 6 months, I think are part and parcel of some of those frustrations I used to experience, and not to lump myself into the experience of someone who has been subjugated, but I do sense a kindred spirit in my intolerance for privilege.
Right.
The inability to ask the hard question is the very essence of privilege, and I always felt that. And I still, as I say, wrestle with that. I don't want to ever avoid the hard conversation because, hey, bad for business, status quo, good for privilege. And I feel a tremendous, nagging responsibility to break through that and not be, beholden to the mighty dollar. But you know what? Look, America, if you ask, is America built on morality or is it built on mammon, the worship of money? It's the latter.
Yeah, but that's interesting though, because I think what you're getting at there is there's a tendency sometimes when you're asking somebody a question that they sort of react like the answer is self-evident, right? And that it's why are you even asking the question, right? Mm-hmm. And I kind of like you, I react to that sort of response, and maybe that's what arose sometimes in the Gary Bettman interviews. I don't know, because it's sort of, as a viewer, I was sensing that too, and as a viewer who's a journalist, right? That's what I'm reacting that way because of my role in interviews, but and not to go too far down that, but I actually have a lot of respect for Gary Bettman. I think if you judge him by the criteria of his job, he works for the owners of the National Hockey League. He doesn't work for hockey fans.
Correct.
He's done a fantastic job. I agree. Done an exemplary job by the definition of his job, but the
only thing, Mark, I'll just stop you on that because, the revenues haven't soared. Now we're through the pandemic. It's going to be a different kettle of fish, but by having a cap, by having Toronto Maple Leafs or New York Rangers not able to purchase the team that could be in contention. I know that the draft may work out in the Rangers' favor here now that they've won a lottery and such. But you do have to ask yourself, is it great for business to have gone the cap route? I think by my sort of metrics, baseball did better by having their version of a cap. The NBA is different. Again, it's hard to compare because the NBA, the star players can play on the court for almost the entire 48 minutes. So apples and oranges there. But, the business hasn't soared. The only reason it really grew dramatically when Gary was at the helm was when Bob Goodenow and the PA forced them to have new revenue streams, new arenas, new ways. And that exponentially grew the business. It was the union with their salaries, which were fair market. No, I don't know what fair market value, but which were closer to fair market value.
Depends on your criteria.
Yeah, I mean, there's artificial wedges such as arbitration and such, so it's not completely fair to Gary and the owners either. But you still have, this sense of did the business flourish because of Gary's leadership, or did it flourish inadvertently because of what the union did to push them into finding new revenue streams? That's a question that I think would be fair to ask.
Very interesting. You mentioned doing things with a red heart or a black heart. I saw a quote from you about that in an article that I read. Can you talk more about that? I think that's really a really interesting metaphor.
Well, that's again, I attribute that idea of red heart, black heart to Shireli Najak, who's Ismaili Muslim. His parents were Ugandan refugees who came to the country in the early 1970s when Idi Amin evicted 80,000 Asians, and the Ismaili Muslims of Uganda were among them. And so there's again, Mark, a whole different religious background, a whole different set of experiences informing someone's approach to life. And it was Shireli who found the way to explain to me, how to go about your work with empathy, compassion, by using that analogy. A red heart is generous, is kind, is loving. A black heart is the axe to grind heart. And sometimes when you're in you get your journalist hat on and you feel like you're out to solve the problems of the world and to speak on behalf of the world, you can, if you're not careful, slip into the approach of using a black heart. I can just sense my mother didn't like it. My mom didn't like when she saw what she would perceive in me as arrogance. So she was always after me to find a little more humble tone because I was self-assured and she didn't want me to come across as arrogant. I think that's a little bit what that's all about. And yet, on principle, on ethics, I suppose, my right to throw my, haymaker ends where my right arm stops and your nose begins. But I think it's a real, it's a dance. The role of a journalist is, to get at that truth. And Brian Stevenson wrote a book called Mercy, Just Mercy. He's a lawyer in the United States who has done a lot of work on death row in the southern states. And there again, that word mercy, I think is a very great word. If I was to sum up the concept of black heart, red heart, it would be to not lose your mercy. And if you keep your mercy about you, then you'll keep your wits about you.
Going back to preparation, I understand as well that you consider rest to be a big part of preparation. Is that right? Can you talk about that a bit?
For sure. I think, I now counsel young broadcasters going into an Olympic experience. It's all well and good to read endlessly or prepare endlessly, but you've got to go into it well rested. First of all the research you do, it gives you confidence, but it's apt to mean nothing when on the second day there's a crash or a drug test or who knows what direction the course of, it's much like history, right? Political theater. Brian Mulroney wins his second mandate in a landslide in '88, and the next election they have two seats. Trudeau leaves in '79, he's back by 1980. There's just no... The history is great, but it isn't necessarily a good predictor of the future. So be rested. So be in a position where your body and mind are sound to be able to react, because you will be forced to react. And there's nothing, no prep is, and the lack of confidence you have from being ill prepared is one thing, but the feeling you have when you're, called at 2 a.m, Ben Johnson has tested positive, get into work. If you have been running on fumes for several weeks, you're not going to do a great job. You need to have as much energy and rest in the bank as you can muster going into key moments. And that's just, for me, Mark, when the, Stanley Cup is, when we went into this year's Stanley Cup during COVID-19 with as many as 6 games a day, beginning at noon and ending at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
I knew no drinking, right? There's just no room for drinking. I had probably 6 weeks without a drop. I had lots of new commentators to try and bring along and help. So it was a focus-driven period in my work life, and that meant lots of sleep and clean living. And I think that's important for you and me in our gig.
Yeah. And so do you try to get a certain amount of sleep, and do you have sleep routines and practices? Because of course your job keeps you up late at night sometimes too, right?
Well, I find that I sleep well after work because it's mental exhaustion. And that's even for me a better sleep remedy than physical work. I can do 3 hours of working out and I will sleep well, but I'll sleep far better after a real emotional mental day. So yeah, no trouble sleeping usually when I'm in the throes of a busy workload. And I think I try to go for 8 hours. That would be big for me. And as I said, I would I would taper my performance enhancing substances. Good for parties, but not for work.
Yeah. So how much do you actually read? How much time do you spend reading? How many books do you read in a month or a year? How do you make time for that?
Well, again, that's I really regret that I didn't read as much when I was young. Now, like most people are on their device and go to, they're kind of ricocheting all around reading that way. Not a bad thing. But I just, to sit with Beverly McLaughlin's book or to sit with a book is just one of the great joys of my life. And I read, before going to bed almost every night. I'll spend when I have windows where I'm not busy, I'll block out an hour in the day to read or more. And if I get into it like anyone else, then that becomes 3 days to finish a book. But most of my reading is nonfiction. It's definitely with an eye to stealing. As they say, you steal from one book, it's plagiarism. You steal from 100, it's research. And I do that.
Yeah. You've had a chance to, and we haven't even talked about some of your Olympic experiences. So it's not just about hockey, but you've had a chance to be around so many people who have achieved greatness. What have you learned about that? What do you think it takes to be the best in the world at something, or to reach the level of a Wayne Gretzky or a Mario Lemieux or an Olympic athlete?
I think a lot of it, you seem to have sibling rivalry. Like for being an only child, I had no sibling rivalry, so I was not a great competitor. I didn't need to win. Mom and Dad were going to, foist the attention on me, and I do think it's productive. Connor McDavid has just one brother, an older brother, and Mitch Marner, one brother, an older brother. I hear that story a lot.
That came out in the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, that he desperately wanted to be a better basketball player than his older brothers to get his dad's attention, right?
Yes. So sibling rivalry to me is a huge one. And then after that, like honestly, my Olympic experience is that I treasure results that aren't the championship results more than I treasure the championship results. Simon Whitfield won in 2000 in the triathlon in Sydney, but his silver in Beijing stands out for me. Marianne Limpert's silver medal in Atlanta in the 200 IM stands out for me. Leah Pell's that same Olympics, fourth. That's the same Olympics as Donovan Bailey, and I will not take away from Donovan because he is the Gretzky, he is the LeBron James or Michael Jordan. What he did was just unbelievable. And he was consistent through that World Championships in Gothenburg in 95 and the Atlanta Olympics in 96. And he set the world record and he anchored the relay win. He put together 2 years like no other runner on earth. And I look up to it greatly, but I often find that the great joys come from Steve Nash and the basketball team in Sydney losing, and his speech afterwards. Just the pursuit of it stands out usually for me. But if you want to know making of a champion, that's for me, sibling rivalry seems to be one of the secrets. And then after that, you just gain the first time you succeed doing it, then you can do it. And you need to have that. You need to have a few experiences of being put in the crosshairs and delivering. And then once you have that base of confidence, like that was Jeff Gowan who taught me the expression, under pressure, you will sink to the level of your training. When you have been there and done it, that is a precursor to greatness.
Last question, Ron, and I'm very grateful for your time, but we started out very early on by talking about let your guest be the star. And I know that's a great lesson for someone doing an interview, but I think it's also a great life lesson. I heard a presentation recently in which it was actually about sales and marketing and business, but it was very much about how when you're talking to another person, you have to remember that they are the hero of their story. They're the hero of their life story. And you don't want to try to be the hero of their story. That's not going to make them feel good. It's not going to build trust. It's not going to build a great relationship. So I think it's about more than just broadcasting. When you say, let your guest be the star, it's also about how you make other people feel when you're relating to them, when you're talking with them, right?
And you almost don't have to do anything to have that happen other than back off, get out of the way. It's a hard thing to do, right? It's noble in all of us to wish to to make someone's life better. But you don't have to do that. They'll figure that out themselves. And I think, as we grow older and we have tried and failed, that's why Cervantes and Don Quixote and this notion of being a knight to go out and save the world, is full of hijinks. It's full of, failure. It's full of lessons of just that. Please respect that the other person is, and that's where I think I got so confused on false equivalencies, is I assume kind of readily that everyone's as clever and quick on the uptake and can see, deception, and they probably can. I don't know why I ever felt the need to go in and with the broadcast make that difference. So that has been I'm 60 now, and I'm sure if I go back and think about it, I probably tended to be the know-it-all, the one who wanted to help, and I've learned probably the hard way a few times that there's just not an appetite for that, nor a need.
Ron, it's been so great chatting with you. I was really looking forward to this, and it's been so fascinating to hear your perspective on so many things. I think of you as so much more than a broadcaster. You are a teacher in many ways. You are a philosopher, and I always enjoy our conversations and hearing your perspective. And I have so much respect for you as a broadcaster and a voice in our country. So thank you so much.
Mark, same. As I said, for all the times we've chatted, a lot of the greatest chats have been the ones that you and I share. So grateful for this one too.
Let your guest be the star. I love that. That's not just a good tip for people doing interviews. It is a powerful life lesson. Think about that for a second. Think about how good you make other people feel when you listen to them, when you make them feel heard. Think about the impact you can have on others if you let them shine. I really enjoyed that conversation with Ron MacLean, as I always do. I'm going to say one more thing about Ron before we wrap up. He is one of the kindest and most thoughtful people I have ever interviewed. I am really grateful to know him. So once again, thank you to Ron MacLean for joining us on Digging Deep. If you enjoyed this episode, please review it and share it with others. That will help us produce more great content. And if you want to keep digging deep into topics and lessons like this, or see the show notes for this discussion, then go to letsdigdeep.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter and read my blog. Once again, that's letsdigdeep.com. Thank you for listening.